Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel. My name is Sean, and you guys might be a bit confused by the headline of this story, by the subject matter. You might think that we actually jumped in a time machine all the way back to the year 2015, because right now in the United States of America, the University of South Carolina is in a ton of trouble, getting a ton of backlash, and there are people on CNN calling for the banning of speakers Milo Yiannopoulos and Gavin McInnes. And I assure you, this is a current year story. This isn't 2014, this is 2024, but it's a good peek under the curtain at what the authoritarian left thinks you are and aren't allowed to say, and how they believe that the government should take action against speakers who dareth joke about Kamala Harris, the god of the Democratic Party at this moment in time, the nominee who stole it via coup. You can't make jokes about that. You can't make fun of that, and you deserve to be sanctioned by the state if you even dare try. Now, we're going to get into this story. We're going to talk about it, but before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
The University of South Carolina has no plans to cancel an event being billed as a roast of Vice President Harris. I can't even show you the ad for the event because it's sexually explicit, and really I don't want to because it's vile.
So right off the top, I just want to point out that this CNN host is way too angry for this particular story. Again, we're talking about a college event at the University of South Carolina, a state that, by the way, is going to go to the Republican no matter what, and he is just absolutely livid that somebody dareth make fun of Kamala Harris. Now, I want to point out for everybody out there in the audience that the reason he's calling the the advertisement for this sexually explicit is because of the spelling of Kamala's name. Instead of K-A-M, it's actually C-U-M. Use your imagination to figure out why that is. Maybe it's based on some subject matter that they intend to cover, but that is the thing that he's absolutely disgusted about, and he's demanding that the University of South Carolina, a state-funded school, do something about, as in cancel this event.
This so-called roast, and the roast masters are Proud Boys founder Gavin McInnes and far-right provocateur Milo Yiannopoulos.
So first of all, I just want to highlight a couple of things. One, the photo of Milo Yiannopoulos that they used right there is pretty funny. Credit where credit is due to the nerd behind the scenes at CNN who decided to select that from the stock images. Secondly, and most importantly, very interesting that they described Gavin McInnes as the Proud Boys founder, even though he founded the group as a joke and left the group after it became a politically toxic organization. But I do want to point out that they could have easily described him as a vice co-founder, but that wouldn't have the same amount of sting. Now, of course, they're trying to sell you an image out there in the audience. They're going to be relying on the fact that he founded this joke political group as an argument for why he should be deplatformed, and they actually dragged out a state representative, or will drag out a state representative, to show you how authoritarian the left actually is.
The president of the NAACP wants this stopped. He says if South Carolina University's leadership values their black students, it's only right they shut this event down.
So a couple of things. We have the NAACP coming out and saying that the University of South Carolina needs to shut this event down for the black students, but the thing is, Kamala Harris's name being spelled wrong in the thumbnail has nothing to do with her being black, because that is an Indian first name. Secondly, I gave credit to the Baton Rouge head of the NAACP, or the NAACP in Louisiana, based on the story of St. George trying to break away, because that guy said, hey, look, I don't like it. I wish that they didn't do that. I am against it. I would have voted against it, but it is their right to vote in the way that they want. Well, look at this guy right here over at the NAACP, and he has decided that you have no right to ever hear an opposing viewpoint. And again, this is crazy because we're throwing it all the way back to 2014 with this.
We reached out to the university. They pointed us to a statement from the school's president and board of trustees, the chair there. They said in part, censoring even the most hateful individuals and groups does not solve the problems we face in our society, and instead provides them with a platform to win more publicity and support because their message was silenced. As Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis wrote almost a century ago in a vigorous defense of free speech, the solution to fighting offensive speech is more speech, not enforced silence.
So look, I'm not a fan of the people who tend to head up universities in this country. Obviously, they have an overwhelming bias to the progressive left. Obviously, that rears its ugly head in a bunch of different policy decisions, but we got to give credit where credit is due to this particular individual who almost certainly is on the left, almost certainly disagrees with Milo and Gavin McInnes because he understands the game that is going on right here. Because let's be perfectly honest with this. Whatever your thoughts are on Milo or on Gavin, the fact of the matter is this is meant to get attention, specifically negative attention, and potentially trigger a lawsuit over the fact that the university, which is a state-funded institution that receives money from the federal government, is going to violate their free speech rights by shutting this down, even though they wouldn't do so if this were an anti-Trump event. Obviously, that is the intent right here, and the president of the university releases a statement. This dumb guy at CNN reads that statement, and he's not able to process that information. The progressive lefty university heads have learned something that the CNN hosts are just too slow to pick up. And then again, this guy is so angry because how dare you go after the anointed queen, Kamala Harris, because isn't she so amazing with her entire presidential platform being about precisely zero policies?
South Carolina State Senator Tamika Isaac Devine joins us. She's written a letter of her own, also asking the university to cancel this event. I thank you for being with me.
So they introduced this state representative right here. And again, this should be a cold, sobering look at the Democratic Party, because he says that she has written a letter of her own to the university telling them to censor political speech that she disagrees with against the newly anointed dear leader, Kamala Harris. Again, this is the Democratic Party right here. When they talk about who's in favor of free speech and who's against it, it could not be more clear. There's an entire segment on CNN which functions as Democratic Party controlled media. And right now we're going to do an entire segment based on this, even though obviously all of this is violative of the First Amendment, what they're advocating for. But let's see where it goes.
This morning, these two roast masters, Milo Yiannopoulos and Gavin McInnes. McInnes founded Proud Boys. We know that several of their leaders were sentenced, arrested for their role in January 6th.
So he's saying some of the Proud Boys people were sentenced for their roles in January 6th. Where were you January 6th? I was in a car dealership trying to buy a car when the car salesman tried to convince me that frame damage wasn't real damage. Then I looked up on my screen as I was furious about frame damage to the vehicle that I was looking at, and I realized that our democracy was getting frame damage. Where were you January? Where were you January 6th? Where were you January 6th? Where were you? Now look, the reason I make fun of that is obvious. Black Lives Matter rioters had 500 plus riots in a 90-day period post the death of George Floyd, and VP Kamala Harris, she was actually advocating for the bailing out of those rioters in a tweet that, by the way, is still up on her account to this very day. So I don't give a damn about their faux outrage related to these rioters, but I also want to point out that Gavin McInnes told people to not go to January 6th and was not the leader of the Proud Boys at the time that January 6th occurred. Unlike Kamala Harris, who of course endorsed and aided in the bailing out of the criminals behind the Black Lives Matter riots.
I believe that the message that's being sent by allowing a platform for these people is that we are condoning speech that is offensive to a lot of people. I do understand the university's position, but I also think that we have to send a very clear message to all students that we encourage diversity and that we support diverse views, but we also will not condone hate speech or things that will offend others.
So the first thing that this woman says, again, a state representative, somebody who took an oath to the Constitution of the United States of America, to South Carolina's Constitution, and right off the bat, first thing out of her mouth is a complete lack of understanding, or more accurately, her showing that she doesn't give a damn about the First Amendment. She's like, I understand the position that the university is in that if they were to shut down this event, that would be illegal, a violation of the United States Constitution. But what we need to say is that we don't tolerate hate speech, which, by the way, is protected speech, obviously, or speech that is offensive. Again, I'm offended by this authoritarian going on CNN right now, spewing these awful ideas that are the antithesis of the United States of America. But I do find it funny that she said we need to support diversity. And let's be clear, we definitely 100% support diversity of thought, as long as you don't make fun of Kamala Harris, as long as you don't offend anybody, and as long as she gets to decide what the range of diverse thought is that is allowed to be expressed in the United States of America. These are the people that are supporting Kamala Harris. And this guy on CNN, a person in the media whose job exists and is protected by the First Amendment, should be challenging her, but instead he brings her on and lets her spew this nonsense, which is infinitely more offensive than anything Milo or Gavin could do on air, as if it's normal, as if this is an acceptable thing for a politician to do. But again, democratic authoritarianism is considered perfectly fine. As long as you have a D next to your name, you can advocate for the most horrific policies humanly possible, violate every right in the Constitution, but it's okay because you know what? Diverse voices. Oh gosh, isn't it going to be so much better when Kamala Harris is violating all your constitutional rights because she's a woman of color?
And so you believe this goes beyond just offensive speech, because obviously offensive speech is protected. You believe what? What's the consequence or implication outside of a room of people who are just saying vile things to one another for a laugh?
So what makes me laugh about this question right here is you can actually see the gears churning in this CNN guy's brain, and he realized that bringing on a state representative who wrote a dumbass letter trying to shut down speech because it was offensive might actually make him look like an idiot. So he says, even though she was not at all unclear that she was upset about offensive speech, obviously offensive speech is protected by the First Amendment. What do you think the implications of this roast making fun of Kamala Harris actually is beyond the room? Cause, you know, you gotta have something more. You gotta have another thing attached to this for you to want to shut it down, right? Like, he's rethinking and recalibrating his position right now, which shows that he at least has a couple more brain cells than this woman right here, who is legitimately offended by the idea that anybody would be allowed to make fun of Vice President Kamala Harris.
Well, I think what it does is it encourages an environment that makes marginalized communities feel more marginalized. The University of South Carolina has done a lot in the last couple of years as far as reconciliation with their racial history. They have done monuments celebrating Black history and the role that African Americans have had in the university. And so I do think that this takes us back a little bit at promoting and giving a platform to people not only that have said vile things, but have promoted violence, like on January 6th.
I gotta be perfectly honest with you guys. I like some dark jokes. I like some insensitive jokes. I find them amusing, but I know that they're not appropriate for all different situations. So sometimes when the guy out there is just trying to say a mean and hurtful thing and pretends that he has a political point behind it, I kind of tune that thing out, even though that seems like they're doing it more and more often on the right wing without an actual underlying point. That being said, never in the calculation of whether or not a joke is funny or whether or not speech is acceptable did I think that the potential that this could make somebody who is allegedly marginalized feel more marginalized run into the calculation of whether or not I would approve of something or disapprove of it. And it for damn sure should never run into the calculation on whether or not somebody's First Amendment rights should be violated. This woman's like, well, listen, man, well, the university, they've honored a lot of the blacks that have been in the University of South Carolina. And, this really undermines that because some of those marginalized people could feel even more marginalized if they're allowed to make fun of VP Harris. So we can't have a First Amendment criticize a politician, somebody running for the highest office in the land, because allegedly some black kids on campus are going to feel more marginalized. Insane, absurd. And by the way, I don't believe that Black America is this weak at all whatsoever, that a joke about Kamala Harris is going to ruin their life or make them uncomfortable or feel unsafe in a university. And if that is true, if they do feel that, then they need to be in a kindergarten, not in a university. You do not have a right to not be offended. If you don't like a joke, if you don't like speech or anything like that, then newsflash, you don't have to listen to it. you can leave the campus. You can go enroll in your kindergarten classroom and enjoy nap time like all the other children, but don't start bitching and moaning about how you feel displaced because somebody disagrees with your politics, because somebody doesn't like your preferred political candidate. That's absolutely insane. I mean, stretch this a bit further and you could make the case that anybody voting against Kamala Harris could make these marginalized people feel so much more marginalized because they didn't want to support the anointed god Kamala Harris. We can't have a country like that. And again, this does not mix with the First Amendment at all whatsoever.
And so I do think that this takes us back a little bit at promoting and giving a platform to people not only that have said vile things, but have promoted violence like on January 6th.
Now, I don't know if Milo has promoted violence like on January 6th, but I will point out that Gavin definitely did not. Again, he left his association with the Proud Boys. There's a reason why the leaders, not including Gavin, because he wasn't a leader, were charged in relation to January 6th. And again, if you're going to talk about promoting violence, let's talk about all the Democrats who stayed silent, who cheered on, who helped bail out Black Lives Matter rioters. Those people were endorsing violence. And I don't give a damn that later on in the campaign, they whispered into a microphone once that they don't condone political violence from the left wing. For years under the Trump administration, we had Antifa radicals attacking people going to Trump rallies. Actually, even before Trump was elected, this was happening during the campaign. There was a huge incident of this in San Jose. And what did the media do when women were being beaten up by large crowds? They reported on this one woman clashing with the crowd as if she was going one-on-one when she was pinned up against this hotel room door with all of these different people. It's absolute madness how these people try to say, oh, this person encourages violence, as they actively do that. As this person, by the way, is encouraging the violations of the civil rights of people that she disagrees with.
Well, what I do understand the freedom of speech, but what I think that the university has an opportunity to do now is to show not only do we not condone this, but we will make our university an environment that promotes inclusivity. So I'm encouraging the university to have another event that brings together the diverse groups that are opposed to this event and bring more attention to that. We need to silence what's happening at this roast and bring more attention to it, and allowing people to use the university for that platform is not good.
So this woman right here who encouraged the cancellation of this event, let's be clear about that, is now pivoting and saying, well, look, I understand the importance of freedom of speech, but what needs to happen is the university needs to run a counter event to this because, you know, the First Amendment or whatever, you know, it might get in the way of what I'm demanding. And I will also point out that this is a big fat no. If some other student group wants to bring one of their crappy speakers and do their own event, that is one thing, but the university shouldn't go out of its way to counter program its own students. Again, imagine if the state decided that, hey, look, I understand, I'm not going to censor your speech or anything like that, but I'm going to gather together a mob of people that hate you during your speech and pretend like that's also not a violation of the First Amendment. And I will also point out that this never happens when left-wing speakers come to speak on these campuses. You have a murderer's row of horrible people, communist supporters, all kinds of terrible left-wingers coming into these campuses day after day after day, and you almost never see somebody call for them to be removed or shut down unless they're people that are further on the left that don't think they're radical enough. It's disgusting that we're still talking about this 10 years later after the left really pushed this to the brink and we started to see attacks on people like Milo, like Gavin at Berkeley and all these other different locations.
But having another platform that encourages not only people to come and vote and register, but to educate themselves and promote diversity is where we need to be going now.
So she also wants them to encourage people to vote for Kamala Harris and encourage them to support diversity. Again, state-sponsored diversity ideology needs to be put forward by the university more than it already is doing that, by the way, because it is a university, in order to satisfy this authoritarian hag.
The university, and again, the image, and I know describing it this way is unfortunately going to lead some people to go look for it, but it's a vile image, this advertisement. The university has condemned it. and the language used on it.
So again, this guy is pearl clutching over the image used to promote this. I'm not sure how YouTube would treat the spelling of Kamala, which again has a C-U-M instead of a K-A-M, but the image is not graphic or anything like that beyond that change in text in the lettering. You could call it a crass joke, but let us not exaggerate how insane this is. You guys can look this up for yourself. It would not be anything that I would be too scared to show you, but for the fact that YouTube has crazy rules that they seem to over-enforce against this channel. Otherwise, I would put it up on screen. In fact, I might put it up with that part of the lettering blocked out so you can see it's a normal poster, but for the spelling.
We heard from the president of the university and South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster on why they will not call for this event to be canceled. Here's what they said.
What they say, again, it's First Amendment rights, and it's not the endorsement of the university. It's the students who invited them.
Unless there's some truth threat, unless there's a real danger involved, which you probably will not know until it gets started, then the university has no right to cancel it.
So two things. Number one, it is very good to see the president of the university point out the obvious that they shouldn't be canceling this. And this is something that is not always a guarantee because we have organizations dedicated to suing universities because of the number of times that they shut down these events. Secondly, we see the governor of South Carolina, a Republican governor, explain the obvious as well. But more notably than what he explained is the fact that this woman behind him appears to be sniffing his shoulder, and honestly, that makes me rather uncomfortable. I know you guys might think this is not the most important aspect of the story, but the fact of the matter is, based on the way that this image is compressed, or based on the fact that she might actually be sniffing his shoulder, it looks like she is sniffing his shoulder, and I want a full investigation into this until we figure out what the hell is going on.
We've also heard from the White House. The press secretary has talked about this. Obviously, the governor there. Short of cancellation, what are you calling on them to do? Is it just this counter event, voter registration? What do you want them to do, if not end it?
Is that not ridiculous, though? I understand bringing this up to the university president, but how do you need to bring this up to the governor? How do you need to bring this up to the White House press secretary? I know she's been rather authoritarian when it comes to censoring speech, as is Kamala Harris, who's advocated for politicians that she doesn't like to be banned off of social media. But the fact of the matter is, this is one story that they're blowing up out of South Carolina that is thriving on the attention and wouldn't be as popular or as known but for segments like this with these authoritarians calling for censorship.
Well, I think the university, and I've had lots of conversations with university leadership, I think what we're looking at is using this an opportunity to show where we are in this country, and most importantly, where we can go. And these students are fired up, and they are participating not just in the electoral process, but educating each other about diversity and representing diversity. So I think that we can use this as a long-term opportunity to promote diversity. Our state is one of two states that doesn't have hate crime legislation. How do we encourage our legislature to pass hate crimes legislation? How do we make sure that we have good judges on the bench that will help us long term? So I think that this can be an opportunity for us to really engage young people long term in the democracy, saving democracy in our country.
So this representative from the American Nazi Party, I meant to say the South Carolina Democratic Party, is talking about how we could use this as an opportunity to educate people on the fact that we don't have hate crime legislation. And again, I just want to point out that she is bringing this up in the context of political speech against a presidential candidate, a current office holder, the vice president of the United States of America. And the fact that South Carolina doesn't have these hate crime laws, that's great. That's perfectly fine. That requires mind reading and motivation for a crime that we typically don't use in any other context, and it makes it a really sketchy situation. Now, I am a believer that you can have aggravating circumstances and mitigating circumstances, but the idea that if you punch somebody in the face, but they're the same race as you, that's an assault. But if you punch somebody in the face and they're a different race than you, then we get to mind read and decide whether or not you did it because of evil white racism, is insane in every possible way. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. And as usual, if you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about CNN and a South Carolina Democrat calling for censorship of criticism of Kamala Harris. Till next time.